hope you're enjoying breakfast. Time is kind of flying away, so we're going to get this underway because we have a lot to talk about this morning. So welcome to this very special SOPA Insider series. Now we're here today to talk about this very rapidly emerging area of content marketing and the rise of digital media. My name's Matt Eaton, edit Marketing Magazine, and today I will be hosting this very esteemed panel. So thanks to SOPA and David and Christine and Charlie for having me here today. So we're here to look at, as I mentioned, this kind of fast-moving world of digital media, how it's reshaping newsrooms today, how reporters are reacting and responding to news in real time, and what is required of media companies today who now have to be a lot more nimble and responsive to some of these trends that are emerging. Now, all this is kind of taking place in this backdrop of this world of content marketing and brand-funded journalism, and also how companies today are working with these mass audience aggregators like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and how we're building these kind of newer style of media companies and new revenue models. So lots to talk about this morning, so we'll kind of jump straight into it. Now, I introduce our very esteemed panel today. We have Beatrice Lowe, who is Sparkling Brand Director at Coca-Cola. Now, Beatrice has been there since around the year 2000, I think, and responsible for Coca-Cola and Coke Zero, Schweppes, everything. In addition to that, also the social media team, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later on. So thank you, Beatrice. We also have Alexander, who's flown all the way from Bangkok to be with us today. Alex is the multimedia director of Coconuts Media. Now, if you don't know Coconuts Media yet, you should. It's a very interesting network of local city websites which use social media to boost its coverage of these urban centres in Asia. I mean, you guys are in Bangkok, obviously, you're in Hong Kong and Manila, I believe, and Singapore. So, yeah, that should be quite a good area for us to talk about later. Of course, Tom Crampton, who is now Global Managing Director with Social at Ogilvy. But before that, spent years as a globe-trotting journo with the New York Times and the Herald Tribune, and then made his way to Hong Kong to work with Jimmy Lai, which quite an interesting move for you, Tom. But now has a very different role, working on the other side of the fence, helping brands to understand this world of social media. So it'd be great to hear from you soon, Tom. And finally, Adam from the Wall Street Journal. Adam is Asia Digital Editor at the Wall Street Journal, and got a very extensive background in journalism, about 2 decades, I believe. So it'd be great. So he's responsible for how the content of the Wall Street Journal is consistent across all different platforms. So so please give our panelists a very big round of applause for being here today. Now, also, if you want to jump on Twitter and share a few insights from this morning, there's a hashtag SOPA Talks, which is the hashtag SOPA Talks. So please feel free to share any insights that you hear this morning. So let's get straight into it. Now I think, Adam, it might be good to start with you because I know the Wall Street Journal has been reshaping its newsroom quite a lot in the last, maybe the last couple of years, about how even with the style of journalists that you're recruiting now and the type of people that you're getting into the newsroom. But also about where you guys look to break news now and how all this stuff is emerging. Now I thought maybe a good way to kind of get this discussion started is, do audiences really care these days about where information comes from and which platforms they're reading it on?
Thanks. Just one aside.
Sure.
I've always wanted to have sparkling in my title. They call me many things but never sparkling, so kudos. So yeah, I think, honestly, if I hear one more time, did you see this piece of news on Facebook? It's not from Facebook, it's from a news agency or it's from a newspaper. I think people don't care unless the news is wrong or late. And then I think it's all our fault. It's not Facebook's fault. But what that underscores is the platforms have changed and the time of delivery has changed, the urgency of getting things out has changed. And it's difficult because it's not that hard to write a story. I can sit down and write anything, but to verify all the facts in it costs a lot of time, costs a lot of money. If you do video, that raises things even more. Everybody wants to see things now. Everybody wants things visually, so that raises our costs because we have to hire journalists. We spent, I don't know, over 18 months. I came here 4 years ago and spent 18 months building a micro studio inside the bureau. Altogether, I was looking at the receipts, it's about $150,000. And then I know exactly how much it costs per produced minute to do a video. The people to shoot the videos, it's become a lot more expensive. And yes, at the end of it, people generally don't care, but that doesn't mean that we have to stop producing high quality content.
I mean, what about you, Tom? I mean, you come at this from quite a very different lens these days. I mean, your background obviously in journalism, but we sort of live in this time now. If it can be known, it will be known. So, how much of a game changer is that for media companies?
Well, first, the point about whether people care where the news has come from. We actually did a study of 20 countries globally with SurveyMonkey, asking people a number of questions. One of them was that specific question: where do you care where the news comes from? And what's interesting about it is, as Adam was saying, a lot of people attribute news to platforms. Rather than to the news organizations that produce them. Interestingly, we found a slight variation in that the countries where they cared most about the source of the news was ironically countries where there's less freedom of the press. So our theory we posited around that was, if you're in mainland China, you're not going to be so enthusiastic to post a highly political statement on your Sina Weibo feed because you might get censored. But if you post something that was published in People's Daily, it's an official source, therefore you've got a little bit of distance from it. So it's just to say we have actually data showing that people don't care where it comes from, except in a few exceptional cases. And going forward, I mean, that does present a challenge to news organizations, but you have to have the value content produced, and it's up to those news organizations, Wall Street Journal, to make sure that it's understood that they're the ones who are producing. And at the end of the day, people are going to care that the facts are right and the facts are true.
What about for you, Alex? I mean, you guys, you're quite open that you do use social media to get deeper into some of these smaller urban cities around Asia. I mean, what's your view on all of this?
Social media is huge for us. I think that's integral to our strategy. I think a big part of Oaknet's success is based on the idea that the way that we consume news now is not necessarily going to a highbrow or a lowbrow news source. Everything is in one feed now, right? So you scroll down the Facebook feed, Twitter feed, whatever, you're going to get hit with stories from all sorts of outlets. And the important thing is to be in that feed and to be relevant to that feed. So we'll cover things that maybe the Wall Street Journal would cover. We would write something in that style, but we'll also do stories that are a bit more irreverent and silly and fun.
I mean, there's a couple of arguments that you could have about the media today, which is largely being fueled by the rise of digital and these kind of smaller aggregation sites, is that it sort of is a race to the bottom, but the more eyeballs you take on the way down, the more successful you are, if that makes sense. Or you could also argue that news is more democratized than ever, and we have so much access to information. I mean, what side of the fence would you sit on that?
No, I hope your publication beats us to the bottom on this one. But it underscores a basic issue. So there's the value of content, and then there's the value of content. Digital's already here. It's been here forever, and the news industry's been dying since Moses wore short pants. It's nothing new. What I do think is that, for the Wall Street Journal, for example, there's this value that we place on a subscription that's very high. Yet our content, when it goes out onto Facebook, some mornings I wake up and ask the question, Facebook, friend or foe? And I can't answer it sometimes because on one hand, it gets you this amazing reach, But on the other hand, if you kind of build a little grid about the value of Facebook traffic, what are people doing with your content, they just don't value it as highly. Long story short, I'm kind of feeling like it's not really a race to the bottom because of us. It's a race to the bottom because everyone wants everything so fast, so quickly that everything becomes commoditized that much quicker. I think the most important thing, and this gets at coconuts, Alex was talking about video. We were having breakfast. The video that they create, and Vice is out there. What it means to me is that you have to create something memorable, something exclusive that has lasting residual value. We have to do that while at the same time producing news that, in the old days you'd say it was lining the bottom of the birdcage. These days, 5 minutes after you put it out, it's not valuable anymore.
Alex, what lessons do you think there are for legacy media organizations in the style of network that you guys have built up?
Well, I think our success is our voice works really well online. And the sites that we're looking to emulate have a very strong voice, and they're very shareable. Often they take strong views, often it's just more friendly to social media. It's less stuff that will line
the shareable, sticky sides of the content.
Exactly, yeah.
One thing I'm wondering about is having moved from media into working with brands, and now formerly the world was, back when Moses was wearing short pants, the media organizations had a monopoly on distribution and access to audience. Just the ability to be able to deliver a newspaper every morning to line everyone's bird pages. You had to have a tremendous system in place to do that. And there was value in that on two fronts. One, you would have people paying for that. They'd actually pay to have that newspaper delivered to their door. And then on the other side, you'd have people paying to be in that paper, which is a really wonderful thing if you're the publisher, because you've got money coming in from both sides, which is why publishers back in the day flew helicopters and had fancy cars. Now we're entering a world where, thanks to these platforms, these distribution challenges are not so much in place. And in this new world, what I find interesting is that brand obviously can now build up in media and have an incredible reach very, very quickly. We had one case where we built up a community online around a particular product, happened to be diapers in Hong Kong. Very narrow, more narrow than a city. And we had a significant portion of the new parents in Hong Kong who are associated with that effectively media platform. That was a higher penetration of new parents than any media in Hong Kong had ever had, and probably ever before. And in that new zone, what I find interesting is that brands are very much focused on both figuring out what these communities are interested in, which is what should they be reading, which formerly was the job of an editor. And they're also very much focused on how they can accelerate that content beyond just putting it out in front of people. So that's figuring out what are the ways that we can get reach and grow it. So those are the two things that I think are very interesting that brands are very involved in. And I'm frankly not that familiar with what media are doing in terms of, one, figuring out what are the things people are going to engage about. Are we measuring it? Are we planning ahead? And two, how are we accelerating it? Accelerating can be something as straightforward as a media buy, or there could be other elements to it.
There's a lot of interesting points in there. Maybe we could throw it to you first, Beatrix. Coca-Cola has a product called Journeys, right, which is almost like a commercially funded news site. What Tom just said. Do you think media companies can learn from how a brand would operate and take maybe that sort of marketing spin on content? You guys obviously are using a lot of consumer insights and the data that you already have about your customers through CRM systems, through all sorts of things. How is that kind of playing into that side of content that you guys have?
Actually, the Coca-Cola Journey is not our only platform. Actually, it launched a few years ago. Actually, Coca-Cola Company officially closed our corporate website, and then we launched our Coca-Cola Journey. And actually, it is like a digital magazine that we really want to move forward. But this is not the only platform. We also activate in lots of different platforms, let's say Instagram, Facebook, and all those things. Let's say when you talk about brand, yes, nowadays we're really focus on which are the platforms that people and consumers are talking about us. Let's say we recently launched a campaign share code in Hong Kong. It's a huge success because we started off with sending some customized cans to all the celebrities and the thing. And consumers just see it in the Instagram and see it in the Facebook, and they were thinking, where I can get those cans, and I really want my name on the can of Coke. And that's why I do think that lots of different platforms that we can leverage on in terms of doing all our brand contents and other things.
I mean, can you give us a bit of an insight into the mechanics of how something like journeys would work? I mean, are you hiring journalists and editors to come in, or are they more in this space of kind of people who understand the more content side?
You mean
like,
Coca-Cola Journey?
Yeah.
Actually, we actually it's an internal magazine because it started off with it's a printed version like 10 years ago, and it talks a lot about our brand stories, our internal, what our CEOs and all those things, and even our marketing campaigns. We want to make it to the public as well, not just within us, and that's why we make it like a digital magazines.
Adam, can we ask you? I mean, how would you guys, do you see insurgents like Coconuts and some of these kind of smaller, quite aggressive sites that are building regional networks? I mean, how can you kind of stem the tide and change? I know you guys are restructuring internally, and you said you're hiring a mobile editor and a social media editor. I mean, and even this kind of brand-funded content. I mean, it seems like everyone's throwing everything at.
Yeah, we hate them for it.
Right.
We really hate them. But, because they make our lives more difficult. But that's okay, because everything's changing, and for a long time it didn't change, or we didn't change. Are we learning? We're learning something from you guys. Although I'm still waiting for the Coke can with Rupert on it. I haven't seen one of those. The personalization of that campaign is really interesting. I keep hearing from focus groups that people want more personalization from the Wall Street Journal. Philips just recently started what they call a digital newsroom in Singapore, partly to disintermediate the media, and partly to disintermediate, it's a hard word to say, the advertising agency pitchman and the buyers. They want to sort of set the conversation or have people observe the conversation going on and jump in instead of making ad buys. That's another lesson for us about conversations. So personalization, conversations, I feel like you're making us sharper. We're not fundamentally changing what we do. We still put out a newspaper, we still put out our websites and our blogs, but the way we're presenting news and the way we're slicing and dicing and putting into buckets is happening because of you.
And is it also changing the way that you look at your own news that you produce? You mentioned before, like launching the Senior Channel into China. Obviously comes with a lot of things like these back-end platforms when you can learn everything about where your news is going and how people are reading it and what platforms they're reading it on. So maybe, the way you do the news as well, but also the way you analyse your own news internally is wildly different. I mean, even for us at Marketing Magazine.
Just one thought on that. I mean, that question is really about analytics. So when I ask that question, Facebook, friend or foe, it's a foe if you just sit there and hope that people like and share your stories and you have absolutely no idea who they are. I mean, I think the value that you need to pull out of a Facebook, even on the business side where they say they're more business friendly, is they need to give you a fantastic dashboard. They need to tell you who's doing what, where, what demographic are they, and they have so much information because of their sheer size that you have to pull it out of them, bit by bit, so that you extract the value. And the same thing is true, we use WeChat inside China on an account, an official account, and we just soft launched one on the different set of servers outside of China in English. First media organization to do that. But the one outside of China has a much, much better dashboard. And I think when you know who's using your stuff, what they're consuming, where they're going, where they're coming from, suddenly you have a really great value proposition.
It'd be great to kind of move the conversation and talk about some of the newer revenue models which are coming, because all this, for people who work in media and in sales in this room, I mean, this is a really topical area. I mean, the conversations about paywalls, it seems to kind of largely stopped. I mean, whether that has evolved as a system for how media companies will work in the future. What are some of the things? I mean, Tom, maybe you can jump in here a bit.
I think one of the challenges, which is highlighted by this conversation, is the media, the paying model is directly related to the amount of time people are spending on your site doing things, which is related to the content on that site. And one of the challenges that I see for a media company, for example, is that there are a lot of brands out there that are producing a lot of interesting and very compelling content. Interestingly, if you look at the sources of those content, if you started out originally, we just had traditional media, then we have sort of websites, now we have BuzzFeeds of this world. And now a new challenger in a way to the traditional media themselves is what is now been dubbed native advertising. We were talking a moment ago about the example of the New York Times did this whole native advertising section on Orange is the New Black. Arguably, that's taking away time from somebody reading a regular article in the New York Times. It's put forward as a great example of something that took a lot of effort to produce and then attracted a lot of attention. So it's almost like the publication is almost competing with itself.
I mean, what have you found in all of this? Are people willing to read sponsored content? Does it bother them?
I think it depends. Obviously, if it's a non-branded thing, then Coca-Cola don't have a role on that one. But sponsored content, I think yes, I do think in some situations they do really want to read it. Let's say in the FIFA campaign that we just did it this year. Actually, FIFA is a big thing in Hong Kong, and if you do content like really branded, consumer may not really interesting to read it and all those things. That's why we partnership with a local media, and then we send them to Brazil, and then to allow them to have their own freedom to make some to do some content and all those things. And we did not come back with some censorship and all those things. They just tell us that what kind of things they really want to do to the readers and all those things. And we just said, yeah, go ahead. And then it's not a branded thing. We only have a sign off in the end. But it depends on the situations.
It's all how it's produced, and there's many examples of it doing. The ones you remember as branded content as terrible are the ones that are bad examples, and the ones that you don't think of as being branded content are good examples. We have this content creator actually coming to Hong Kong shortly, Zach King, who does these hilarious Vine videos, Vine magician. I'm actually had to jump in a swimming pool to try and recreate one.
You should put that somewhere. It's quite hilarious.
I jumped in a swimming pool to imitate what Zach King does in not a very good manner. But anyways, he's coming for this social media matters event, and in his videos, he is sponsored at times by Lenovo, and he doesn't do it in a way that you really mind because he's producing content. It happens to be a Lenovo book that he's, it's a picture of a swimming pool, and suddenly fish start falling out of it, real fish. His video is quite amazing. But you're not sort of thinking, wow, he's hard selling Lenovo. Yeah. It's a product placement. It's something that's not aggressively shoving it in the reader's face. It's just an element of it, which I don't, done in the right way is not going to do it.
What about for you, Alex? I mean, would you say your readers would be less or more open to this stuff? I mean, if they're reading the Wall Street Journal, they may not expect to get this type of content. I mean, but how does that work for you?
Yeah, I think that just what you were saying, like, don't bash the audience over the head. You have to be subtle about it. You have to be tactful about it. We did a campaign with Hendrick's Gin where we did a guide to Bangkok, and it was sort of presented by Hendrick's. And I think if we'd done like a lot of product placement, if we'd done it as an ad, it would have not been successful. But because we went the sponsored content route, it was a lot more effective. It was just a lot more cool. And yeah, I think it's all about sort of respecting the audience, like understanding that the audience is not necessarily going to be sold by a hard sell, and just being subtle and tactful about how you go about communicating.
Adam, is there any revenue models emerging within your organisation that you might be able to give us a little bit of insight? I mean, you have things like ad-free content or something, but which, you know, readers might love, but advertisers will hate. I mean, is there anything sort of emerging?
Yeah, so there are three things. One is, you know, we'll have Philips or somebody buy the site for a week, and you'll get a push down ad on the homepage telling everyone, you know, this free week is courtesy of Philips. We're fine with that. You know, what we're really trying to do is, in the United States, you pay between $100,000 and $200,000 for a full-page color ad in the Wall Street Journal. We're trying to find that kind of value, that kind of margin online. And it's not easy because CPMs don't make up for it. So sponsorship of the site is one way. And we also do have two different kinds of what I would call sponsored content. Now I'm treading a little bit carefully here because our editor, Jerry Baker, has called native advertising a Faustian pact. Yet at the same time, on the homepage of our site, we've had this sponsored content called narratives. It's tastefully done. It's not Thomas jumping in a swimming pool with his clothes on. Not yet. But it's...
That'll be an upgrade.
Upgrade, of course. Yes. But you know, it's clearly labeled. It's tastefully done. And the stuff is actually very well written by a custom content team of journalists or former journalists, whatever you want to call it. And the third part of the model is we do something with, I believe is it Deloitte? We have the CFO journal, the CIO journal, and their content is essentially appearing alongside of ours. Again, clearly labeled. It's a multi-year deal. But you know, we're looking for the same kind of value online that we find offline. And it's not easy, but because we have a premium brand, a brand that's aligned with businesses, not everything is for sale, but you know, the door is open, I'm sure, if someone comes in with an interesting proposition.
I mean, with some of the projects that you've been doing, like the Kowloon Walled City stuff and the history of baseball in Japan, I mean, there's a fascinating way to do storytelling online, but are they successful? I mean, successful, I mean, in terms of making money.
So let me just be frank. I think things like native advertising, sponsored content, pay for a lot of the things that we really want to do that are hugely high content, hugely high quality content. You know, strangely enough, something like the Kowloon Walled City, though, you know, that's the kind of thing where it was successful in every country we showed it. We did it in 4 different languages. And I would say, you know, did it make us tons of money? No. Did Snowfall make the New York Times a ton of money? I think it's one of those things where something has to pay for that kind of high quality journalism, and that's our rationale.
There was something that the Financial Times did around the Boshi scandal, was where they built this very kind of long, very in-depth style book and put it on Kindle for, I don't know, it was like less than $2 or something. I mean things like that. I mean, do you think, Tom, that they have legs and people will go and pay for this quality content, or do they just think, oh, I can just rip it off and find it somewhere for free?
I think we're at a really interesting time because it's an exploration of what the right models are. And I think that there is no single right model at this moment in time. I think there are many different ways. And I think that what's interesting for media companies is they're going to have to be agile at trying to figure out what is the way forward, sort of, you know, swinging between vines in the jungle. You hope the next one's arriving as you're getting there, which it will. But I think that to say right now we have the model, we don't. What's interesting about this time that we're in right now is we're really at the very beginning of this journey. At this point, social media is mapping more and more the actual population of countries in terms of every demographic being represented and every demographic being there. And as we arrive at that point, the ways in which people will get their news and information will evolve such that new models that we can't even think of today will emerge.
Beatrice, would you, I mean, how would you put it, say, like, if a brand like Coca-Cola, with quite deep pockets, big brand, lots of marketing, not really? I don't believe that. But you guys would invest in content, right? You guys are investing in content, and I mean, it's not always easy to invest on like for media companies because it's a tough business in the media. But from a branding perspective, you guys obviously are investing, and you hear stories. I mean, like you said about the Philips. I mean, they're poaching high quality editors to come and do brand funded journalism. I mean, and you guys are obviously investing in.
Yeah, we do really investing on content. I'm not sure any people from YouTube here. I did some Google last night, and actually every single minute, every day, people upload 100 hours of content into YouTube. It's a huge thing. And to us, content is a big word for us because it just spreads. It just spreads in real time. It goes, the minute it goes, and you can never put it back. As a marketer, we usually like before we really control content, because like all those advertising, TVC, those traditional things, we control content. But nowadays, it just do it very differently. And the reason why we do think that content is so important for us is actually we did a lot of research, and actually when we did some research with teens and young adults, you know what, really surprising, they tell us, you know what, I do really care about the content I put up in my social media, in my Facebook. I do really care about how many likes and how many comments I got. If I don't meet my expectation, I feel like it's personal failure. When I hear that, I'm thinking, I'm not that much older than you, and how come I do not feel it that way? But this is true. This is nowadays our fans, our sales force, they behave like that. And from Coca-Cola perspective, we do see a role there. We do see that if we're able to create some content that give them social currency and they can share, and we do think that it's powerful.
Alex, do you guys, how much, what Beatrice said, are you keeping that in mind when you guys do that as well?
The shareability?
Yeah, or giving people the ability to have social currency when they're sharing content.
Yeah, that's huge. I think it says, you know, when somebody shares something, they're definitely trying to, like, somebody shares a Wall Street Journal article, they're trying to say that they're maybe refined, smart, right? With coconuts, it's a different it's a different brand, right? So our readers tend to be younger, educated, they tend to be wealthier, and our sort of general aesthetic is fun, kind of edgy, and so that's the sort of vibe that we want the people who are sharing our content to understand, and when they share it, they want everybody else to understand. We did a video recently, or not recently, but a little while ago, on this subculture of Thai and Mexican gangsters. These Thais who dress up like Mexican gangsters, and it's just odd, it's weird, it's strange, right? And it's very, very shareable. Like, there's a conversation that we started around it. So when we produce content, we think, what would we share? What would we find interesting?
I mean, retweet's got to be one of the most popular functions on Twitter, right? People sharing other people's content, and I mean, are people making money off that? I mean, how do you guys leverage all that and feed back into what you do? I mean,
if I can maybe just a slight diversion away from content a little bit. The two things that I see going forward, and I think this is something that brands are certainly looking at right now, and media needs to take into account at some point, is the two ongoing themes in social are content and connections. Content we've talked a lot about. The things that brands are very concerned about is connections, and this can be expressed in the form of, let's imagine, and we have actually this case in one country where we have created something that is more powerful than the brand itself. It's content, 100% success on the content side. We've created something that is a national icon in this case. The challenge is the brand is saying, wait a minute, who are all these people on this page? We've got 5 million people on this page. How are we connected to them? How can we relate to them? How many of these people are actually our customers? And what can we do to either engage with them if they are our customers, or convince them to be our customers if they are not? So from the point of view of brands looking at social media and social media platforms, this element of content connections is wildly important. The form it takes is CRM is one element. Social CRM is another expression of that. But it's something that is going to be wildly important going forward, as important as content itself.
But just to make one point, and this is why I'm really glad that you're on this panel. A lot of people, Beatrice I'm talking about, but I'm glad all
the rest of us.
Yes. Thanks a lot. No, but I just keep putting my foot in my mouth, don't I? My job is not well understood. Like, digital means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and the point I want to make is that I don't really make a lot of decisions about what we're going to cover, what section B of the paper is going to cover, money investing is going to cover. And the Wall Street Journal Online used to just be the Wall Street Journal Online with nothing else. Now it's becoming a content creation center to supplement, complement, and sort of make that print content pop, to give it a new life. And social media is one aspect of that. And exactly what you said about the connections here. So my job really, and I don't want my boss to hear this, but I'm kind of a brand manager. My job is to spread our brand across Asia. And you learn something from Coke, you learn something from Lenovo, all these companies out there. And for me, it's sort of, what is the content? The content's already been created in the paper. So we have to decide, what are we going to create digitally that is going to work, that is going to add life, that is going to add value, that's going to move things across other people's networks. And that's where the value is in digital for us.
Right, and looked at from the point of view of a brand, that would be, I'm trying to build up all of these connections, which find a way of not just getting the person who's going to want to read that page one story, but also what are the elements that I can bring in that would be of interest to them around that story or the next story on, which would be of value to them.
Quite mind-boggling.
I mean, there's also the thing that the act of discovery is also news in itself now. So, I mean, it's a vastly different conversation. I mean, what about for you guys? And again, we keep going back to this kind of social media, using it to build stories, but it's a very new style of media company that you guys are creating over there. I mean,
It is, and I mean, social media is our bread and butter, but we're also a hyperlocal website. So we're a network of hyperlocal websites, and people need that hyperlocal news, but they're also interested in the stories that are super shareable. So something as simple as some raw footage of a typhoon. That's a story, or something that's about Thai Mexican gangsters that's a bit more quirky and fun. That's a story. Yeah.
I mean, can we kind of talk a little bit about how content and how social media is producing a newer style of media company? And I mean, I just find fascinating the story of Coconuts and how you guys, because I'm a big fan of the site, so don't take it the wrong way, but there's a lot of content aggregation going on the site. I mean, has that been a strategy about how you establish, basically enough content to get people to come back into the site until then? I know in Hong Kong you've hired an editor with a traditional media background, but
Sure.
tell us kind of a bit about that content aggregation story and how all that works.
Sure. So I think content aggregation is kind of like a dirty word a bit, right? But I think what we do is we rewrite stories. So in much the same way that Gawker or a hyperlocal blog rewrites stories that maybe come from more traditional media in a way that's for our readers more interesting and more readable. And maybe there's some commentary in there that starts a conversation. So yeah, we don't necessarily see it as, we are taking stories that other reporters have done, but then we are rewriting them in our own voice. Any new media company is not going to have the resources to have a staff of reporters like the Wall Street Journal does. It's just unreasonable and impossible. And the way that we're successful is people are hungry for that different voice. They are hungry for reading something that's not necessarily the very dry voice of traditional journalism.
What about you, Adam? Does that piss you off?
By the way, Adam, it has already been tweeted about your job.
I'm expecting a call from my boss anyway.
Formerly of the Wall Street Journal here on stage today.
No, I'm not taking a shot at you, but I mean, content thieves like the Huffington Post, listicle shops like BuzzFeed, they snuck up us. And surprisingly now, when they have this massive value versus the massive debt placed on traditional publications, some are being sold for $1, with all their debt obligations. They're now starting, these upstart organizations aren't upstarts anymore. They're starting to produce some serious content. And that's why I'm afraid of you. I mean,
yeah, and I should say it as well. We do our own original content. I mean, we could never do as much as you because we don't have the resources you do, but we do a ton of original stories, original videos, original multimedia packages, and our sponsored content is all produced in-house. It's our own stuff. So, I mean, this is not like a church and state thing. It has to be done all together, and I think that,
when you build your church off of our state, sorry, it's just, all I'm trying to say is the stuff that you do that's original is very good, but what's happened is, and I can't beat up other organizations for spotting and taking opportunity. It's up to us to basically snuff you out early, and it's our failing for not doing that, and that's really what I've spent the last 4 years here in Asia trying to do, which is anticipate the trends, look for the different voices, reach out for the different demographic. It's why we're talking to Facebook and Twitter about who's using us. And I won't belabor the point, it's just that I see where it's headed. They're just a lot, they don't have the big backpack and all this stuff strapped onto them with the legacy newspaper like we do.
Sure, I think that's totally true, but I think there are limitations to what you can do. Like there's limitations to your voice in a way. Like our voice is a lot more flexible. There's a reason that Vice has been so successful. It's because it's providing a voice that wasn't there, that my generation really is excited about seeing. And we're hoping to do that on a different level in Southeast Asia, but I think voice definitely.
Who would you look to as your model? Is it BuzzFeed? Is it Vice?
There's no one organization that we sort of say we are trying to copy you. I think there's a lot of organizations in the States that we see their models and we're really trying to emulate aspects. Like I think Vice's
He's
voice.
not just copying content, he's copying business models.
No original ideas.
When your readers are 40 years old, they're going to need specific information about financing a home. And they're not going to need, a listicle. The top 5 things you need to know when you're buying a home. They need hardcore details. So all I'm saying to you is, as the grandpa here on the panel, is move with them as their needs for value-added information increase.
But there is kind of some truth in that, because there's this debate happening in the US with TMZ now, who looks like they paid for that story with this massive NFL scandal. I mean, the debate is that someone like ESPN did not jump on this story because someone like TMZ has a more relaxed voice, and that they were able to take that story.
But newspapers have always paid for stories. I think like the idea that we have of like a traditional paper is actually a pretty new idea. It's been around for a fairly short period of time. Like if you look back at the journalism of like the 20s, I mean that was like the real yellow journalism. That was, news of the world type stuff, right? I think that the advertising model of the past made it very easy for newspapers to get comfortable and produce the type of voice and content that they wanted. But things have changed, and that's not necessarily possible anymore. I mean, I'm not endorsing what TMZ did. I'm not a fan of TMZ.
There's always been tabloids.
There's always been tabloids, and in any free media environment, that's just natural. People want to pay for that.
It's interesting. I mean, Beatrice, can we kind of bring you in a little bit more, because how do you guys see striking this balance between what people might want to read, as genuine editorial, and what serves a marketing purpose for Coca-Cola? How are you striking a balance? Or is any? I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to say, lessons for media and all of this, which is pretty odd.
Striking the balance, I think from Coke perspective, it is very important that we produce some content that is really share-worthy, really powerful. That's why we do not think it in a way where there's marketing campaigns or genuine kind of content. We just want to do, because we kind of evolve. We used to do lots of by campaign things, like by marketing campaigns, we do it for purpose for specific campaigns. But nowadays we evolve. We evolve to a way we want to do always on kind of content. It's like every single day, it's like building a relationship with my fans, just like we talked about typhoon yesterday, and then we post something. This is how we look at things. As long as it's share-worthy, we give our fans social currencies, and they have engagement with our brands. That's all we want.
And another issue that we kind of haven't really talked about is the transparency of all of this content. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about, do you think that people know that it's coming from Coke, that it's obviously they're sponsored by Coke? I mean, or you guys, do you have to be transparent?
Yes, I do think that because nowadays nothing can hide in this social media world, and transparency and also power back to the audience is something getting really, really more important, not just for brands, but for anything. That's why transparency is something that we really treasure within our system.
One thing, so the thing that I love about brand-generated content, and I read voraciously, it's when there's like some complicated process or some new system, whether it's a trading system or a product or whatever it is, and the brands are best able to explain how those things are carried out, and they demystify things for me. I love reading that kind of brand-generated content. What I can't stand is when I get bombarded by hotel chains and other companies with their brand messages, regardless of whether I want to hear it or not. It feels like an advertisement, an advertorial on my social media platform, and I just not interested.
To the point earlier, that's an example of bad usage of social media by a brand. I think one interesting thing that if you look at a trend going on now in social media and how it might have a future impact on media and offer an opportunity to media, whether traditional or less traditional, is this move towards much more private networks. If we see on mobile, WhatsApp, WeChat, Line, these are much more of a closed kind of community, which frankly poses a challenge to brands who have traditionally been operating off of the current era of Facebook. And the current era of Facebook might be an aberration in the history of social media, where you have these open pages that people are actually interested in going to visit. That era might be coming to a close now as people look to much more friend-centric, closer style networks. So that role of broadcast would go to traditional and non-traditional media rather than brands, which will have a much higher barrier to entry in that case of getting somebody's interest. Because at the end of the day, if they're not doing something interesting, they'll be like feeling like Adam, I'm being bombarded by this hotel I don't care about at all.
And a follow-on WeChat is when someone wants to follow us, that is worth way more than someone liking us or following us on Facebook. I love this kind of private network thing. We're seeing where it's going, and we're sort of trying to get ahead of it, or at least keep up with it, just because we can target messages to individuals inside WeChat. That's something that you're not able to do necessarily on Facebook. I like it a lot better. You know who the people are, what they want, and why they're following you. So I have a lot of hope for things like Line. Even though it's less transparent, you need a great dashboard for it. I don't know, I just feel like it's less amorphous than Facebook.
That's really interesting what you just said, kind of following from Tom's, because then you are almost tailoring what you do for that platform. I mean, how do you expand your audience if you're doing content for a platform or in a platform?
It's just simple. The demographic of something like WeChat skews much younger, so we're going after the hipsters and the millennials that Coconuts has, and I feel like what we really are trying to do now is yes, we want to keep speaking to the same audience that we've always spoken to, but on a new platform, we want to build our audience out, both in age, we want to change the demographic. This is an unprecedented opportunity because people consume news differently, and what I really want, the sort of holy grail for me, is when I put out a little 4-item newsletter with full articles from the Wall Street Journal on WeChat, and it gets beamed across, if we have 250,000 followers in China or whatever it is, and people are beaming it across their networks, your potential reach is millions. And that's an audience that not only didn't we have before, we probably couldn't find it if we tried to look for it.
And the challenge to what you're talking about in terms of new platforms is a very interesting one, and that's a constant challenge that we face as helping organizations go onto social media. And the problem is that the default is that you don't do a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is very, very important. Otherwise, the best analogy would be when the first movies came out, there was always like a still camera sitting in front of a stage. It was just like a film of a play. Only eventually did they understand the vernacular of this new medium, film, and they started having moving cameras, zooming in, edits, all those sort of elements. So really, whenever you move into a new platform, you have to be very aware that there is a new vernacular. You have to learn the new language in order to communicate with people, not just because of their demographic, but by the nature of the platform itself.
Does the way the media and these social platforms, how they're building up, does that play into how you guys plan to run your business in the future? I mean, how do you assess the platforms that you're on or new ones that might be emerging?
Well, right now we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We're a YouTube partner. We are not on WeChat, but our audience is really on WeChat. We're constantly looking at new platforms, but it's a lot of work to start engaging with new platforms. So there's got to be a clear benefit for us. Right now, I think in our part of the world, Line is pretty big, but I'm not sure there's a way that we can really take advantage of that. That would be worth our while. Instagram is huge, but Instagram is not. You're not going to get the same engagement that you would get on Facebook or YouTube.
Beatrice, how about you? I mean, obviously, I don't know how many followers you guys have on social media, but I assume it'd be in the millions.
Yeah, actually, Coke is the largest brand fan page in Facebook around the world. Actually, yes, we do very carefully choose what kind of platform. We got very good engagement in Facebook, but we recently started to engage our fans differently in Instagram. We find the way we do it is very different. You got to be like exactly what you guys said. You got to be really according to that unique characters of that platform, and then you do things differently. Like Instagrams, you do not write about lots of message or anything, but you put lots of pictures, engage them, and it's a very different way to do it.
Cool. Time has absolutely flown, and we haven't asked anyone if they want to ask a question. So we don't have that much longer left, maybe around 10 minutes. So let's throw it open to the floor, and who's got a question? Please.
Hi, my name is Anne. I'm with the Media Village, and we actually create video content for publishers and brands. I was interested in the panel's experience and insights that you guys have gleaned over the years about video content, and how has the audience been reacting to video content? And when I talk to a lot of publishers and brands, they're divided at the moment about whether to put their money to invest in editorial video versus allowing sponsored content video on their site, and the balance that they should put on their sites as publishers debating their video strategy. What have you guys been seeing in terms of eyeballs and where that traffic is going? And I'm of the view that people don't care where that content is coming from and who's sponsoring it, as long as it's informative and entertaining and of value to them. So if two countries sign a free trade agreement, if your journalist is in front of a camera summarizing that story in a minute versus a thought leadership piece about free trade agreements that's being sponsored by a major bank, I don't really think that the audience cares, but I'm interested in what the research has shown from your guys' experience.
Okay, as far as video goes, you either have to endanger yourself, injure yourself preferably, or use cats.
Or jump in a pool. Yeah.
Embarrassing, danger, or injure, or use cats. Video is wildly important. Video, and I just, while we were up here talking about these platforms, different ways of using, I was trying to think up what the series of elements of the development of the internet has been. And we've seen this play out in Asia in slow motion globally, which is where you start out with text, image, video, and then I guess private networks sort of fits in there somewhere as well. And I think video is absolutely key. And the one thing that you highlighted in your question I thought was very interesting. In this survey that we did for Social Media Matters in Singapore in 4 months ago, whenever it was, the dichotomy that we found about content was informative and entertaining. And generally, it swings between the two in different countries. And the entertaining information is the perfect compromise between the two. But that's what people are looking for in a huge level. I think one interesting example of that would be the whole U.S. late night comedians who are now news broadcasters, effectively. John Oliver did this 7-minute piece. If you're interested in what's going on with the Scottish vote, he did a 7-minute piece on that. It was actually very entertaining and informative too. So I think video is absolutely important. Lots of opportunities that you've invested in.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I would say like the two examples you gave are probably two things that I wouldn't either do or buy, just because the subject in and of itself presented that way is kind of a snore. I think that the days of a reporter standing in front of a camera doing a stand-up, are coming to a close. If I were going to do something about free trade, I would go Vice on it. I would find someone who's affected by this. I would tell a New York Times type of video story that way, or I'd do something short and entertaining about it.
With cats or something.
With cats or someone getting injured, right? Exactly.
Video has been a powerful for you.
Yeah, Coconuts TV is really separate from our local websites. So all of our Coconuts TV videos appear on all the websites and also on our YouTube channel. And I think that, Adam, you spoke to this, there are certain stories that are better for video, and there are certain stories that will never ever work for video. And I think knowing the difference is pretty important. Just doing a video because you should do a video is not a reason to do a video. It's going to tie up resources. It's really work intensive. Certain stuff works really, really well. So, like you were saying, I think the Vice angle would be good for that. Also, like an animated explainer would be really shareable. So you got to think like, I always think like, what would my friends share? What would my mother share? And my mom would probably share the animated explainer with clients.
Yep. Actually, from a brand perspective, we do lots of branded video, not just entertaining perspective, but from us, it got to be linked back to our brand, linked back to our brand strategies. Let's say for about Coke, Coke is talking about happiness and sharing, and let's say one of the very viral video that we did is a video that actually is a campaign that Philippines, we got lots of people from Philippines is working outside from Philippines. Almost 10% of people is working there, and they hardly able to go back to home. And we did a project. We send the Philippine people back to their home. We arrange parties and everything for them. It's a very touchable video. It is not just entertaining but touchable, but also it linked back to our brand strategies about bringing happiness to people. That's why it's very important.
And the Singapore happiness movement, the work that's in Singapore.
Yes.
That's
Important for video is the idea that not every video is going to be viral. Only a few, and sometimes it's really impossible to make something viral. It just sort of happens organically. And what's more important is building up a sustainable audience, an audience that trusts your brand, will come back to your brand, understands your brand. That is more valuable, really, than a handful of viral hits, which are just totally unpredictable.
There was a question. Oh, yes, next.
Monica Sanchez, Rosa Marcelli. My question's for Adam. You've got a very interesting role at the Journal where your role actually straddles editorial and commercial, right? And you're one of the few people in the newsroom to have that kind of role. And to your earlier point about Jerry Baker saying that native advertising is a Faustian pact, I think one of the great fears in the newsroom is that there's an increasing blurriness between commercial and editorial. Now, how do you think this is going to have to change in the future? Because in my mind, newsrooms are still very sanctimonious about the boundary between commercial and editorial at a time when things are changing so rapidly, they haven't adapted quickly enough. How do you see this changing in the future?
I would say the future is probably the present, actually, and you call it very, very quickly. I mean, you've been in newsrooms for a long time, so you know. I think ultimately, the battle has been fought and won in terms of what we're going to do. Where is the line? The line is the news people decide what news we're going to do. I think on the digital side of things, you just need to lay down criteria because that's, the news costs money to produce. We expect people to pay for that news one way or another through subscriptions or advertising supported news. But we're also looking for other streams of revenue, otherwise we're never going to grow. So, with that, our ethics czar sets down basic rules, and it's a case-by-case thing. It needs to be high quality and interesting. It needs to be ethical, can't be advertorial. And then ultimately it's something that you want to be able to sell. So my job is to kind of straddle that line and figure out where the opportunities are that when we go to sleep at night, we know we're not compromising what the Wall Street Journal stands for. I think it's different for every newspaper. Their threshold of tolerance is different. I mean, Jerry talked about Faustian pacts, but we still do native advertising. It just has to be done in a certain way. I just think, last thought on this is that if you want to make money in digital, you have to sort of complement, supplement your news, change the way you operate, change the audience, change the message, change the way you deliver it, change the platform. We're slow to do it, but I think there'll probably be more people like me in the newsroom making digital decisions like this.
Thanks. I'm Kelly from Branded. In your research, during our events when we're talking to brands, one of the key things is that, okay, we get it. We know that content makes a huge difference, and we know that we need to build up audiences online. The perpetual question is, what's the ROI on this? Does digital present an opportunity that's much more about targeted eyeballs? Or is it that we're still in the business of selling eyeballs because it's, who's looking at this news and BuzzFeed doing, or indeed the New York Times, doing an article about Orange is the New Black, about institutionalized females in prisons in America. What does this actually do for HBO, and how do you continue to sell that proposition and make up for that deficit of, say, paying for an ad?
Not to be flip, but I'm going to be flip. Everything is an upsell. I think you have to have the audience. They have to trust you. They have to believe in what you do. They have to be interested in entertaining your cats or in the pain that you go through. But of course, at the end of it, I want you to buy a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. I mean, when you want to buy your house, when you want to pay for your kids' college, what better brand is there? And this is not an endorsement for the Wall Street Journal. I'm just saying, in general, that's why we're trying to build the audience. At the end of it, I want you part of the same family.
Yeah, and I guess looking at it from the brand point of view, the ROI is absolutely crucial. How are we going to justify this spending? How are we going to make sure that this is a worthwhile use of money? And Alexander's point about viral videos. Viral videos are not the objective. And a lot of what we've talked about, from my perspective, are all tactics, which are not really where we want to be. What we want to be doing is something that is not a tactical approach to social media, but a sort of grown-up social media. Grown-up social media being something that is built in to the brand platform. Are we building up the brand over time? Are we doing something that is enhancing what the brand is? Too often when brands get involved in social media, they're all about trying to make that viral video, which at best doesn't injure the brand, at worst actually injures a brand that's been built up over decades and decades, which is the same thing that can happen to a Wall Street Journal if the Wall Street Journal suddenly starts doing Vice-style videos. It is, maybe you're getting a new audience, maybe you're getting new people there, but you're undermining the fundamentals of what that organization has built up over decades and decades.
Maybe one final question.
I work for a nonprofit, so one of the things that I wanted to ask you, the Asia Society, is your comment, each of you, on this one of the most successful viral campaign this summer that started the LNS bucket campaign, started from, I assume, the U.S. Now, I mean, in some ways crossing the border, not only to Hong Kong, to Asia, to China, and all that. And that came from a nonprofit, obviously. Working for a nonprofit, there's not a lot of money to advertise in the Wall Street Journal or having a social media staff. So can you guys comment on that specific campaign, kind of short analysis of the success of it, and is that the trend? And I hope that is it.
I guess what I'd say about that is I'd contrast that with a previous campaign. I don't know if you remember the Coney video, wildly popular. A guy did, unfortunately, had a nervous breakdown after it.
Right around the streets.
It was just it took off in a way that he had never expected. The ALS one, the ice bucket, where basically for those who have been on planet Moon, Mars, whatever, you dump an ice bucket on your head or you give money to ALS. What the ALS did, which I would analogize to Obama's re-election strategy, is it had a very simple call to action, a shareable element built into it, and it involved, back to the video theory, injury, embarrassment, pain, no cats, occasionally cats, and had cats in them, that had something concrete coming out of it. The Coney example didn't actually have a concrete outcome, so there was a weakness there. It got huge awareness without moving it through the action phase, which you really want to have. This had awareness, action, and sharing built into the actual process itself. It wasn't the ALS ice bucket was not the very first time that was done. Apparently, it was happening years ago, or not years ago, 8 years ago or something in New Zealand. There was some other campaign that was doing a very similar mechanism with an ice bucket. But it was a very good example of something that has a full process involved in it, though you could summarize what you do in a sentence. So it's a very clever approach to it.
How did you see that? I mean, from your role in marketing, look at that as something inspirational and put a bit of a framework behind it. How Tom just described it.
Yes, actually, the whole thing they did is actually quite. They did it with an objective that they really want to get people concerned about that kind of illness and all those things. And exactly what I said before, it got to link back to what you want to do. As long as link back to your company about if you want to arouse more interest or if you want to create more value or love or whatever thing, as long as it tie back to your strategies, then I do think that it's a very creative kind of way of doing
It
this.
had content,
Yeah.
it had connections,
Yes.
and it had an outcome.
Yes.
All within, and you could summarize it in a sentence. It's quite elegant.
I'm grateful that it happened and went on for so long because it gave us something to report on. And that's, you guys are laughing, but we got a couple million video views from reporting about a phenomenon, and that doesn't happen very often.
Can you comment on why China, maybe, what I found fascinating was the China angle.
Yeah, so oh, so why China? Why was it popular in China? Well, because China, I mean, China wants to build cars, China wants to build airplanes. I mean, I think that China wants to be part of something global, and this was going global. And in a nutshell, I would say, like, from our perspective, we shot one billionaire doing this, and that in and of itself got over 1 million views. And then we reported on others doing it, and it just did very well. So, and the China audience is so large, when you put something on it about Chinese billionaires taking part in a global movement, of course it's going to get watched.
We really have to wrap this up. Christine's up there pointing at a watch. So please give all of our panelists a very big thank you. Big Alex, thanks for coming over from Hong Kong. Thank you, Tom and Adam. Now that about does it for this morning. I think we have this room for a little bit longer, so we can stick around and do some networking. But thank you all very much for your time this morning. Thank you guys, it was a great discussion. And I'm sure there'll be another SOPA Insider soon, so stay tuned. Thanks.
You know, Mike,